In the year 1829, a deserter from the army of the East India Company wandered through the plains of Punjab, traveling under an unusual agreement. In exchange for clemency, he gathered intelligence for the company. Near a small village in what is today Pakistan, he came upon a series of vast earthen mounds rising above the surrounding fields. Historical artifacts with unknown symbols surfaced from the dust. The explorer, who had studied classical history, believed he had found a city dating to the time of Alexander the Great. He recorded what he saw carefully. The scale, the craftsmanship, the weight of the earth pressing down upon ancient structures. Later on, Alexander Cunningham identified this ancient ruin to be a lost Buddhist city mentioned in the 7th century CE travels of the Chinese visitor Xuanzang. In the 1850s, as railway lines stretched across northern India, British engineers, working to connect the cities of Multan and Lahore, used the ancient city as a convenient source of building material. Thousands upon thousands of the bricks were torn from the earth and laid beneath the iron rails to support the modern era. Nearly 100 miles of track would run on the bones of a forgotten city that we today know as Harappa. It was only decades later, under the newly formalized Archaeological Survey of India, that systematic excavations of Harappa began. Archaeologists uncovered seals bearing an unknown script, premeditated and precise urban planning, structures far older than any Buddhist monastery, older than the Mauryan emperors, older even than the epics of India. Then, in 1922, far to the south in Sindh, an officer of the survey began excavating another great mound near the banks of the Indus River. The locals knew the site as Mohenjo-daro, a name given in modern era, translating to Mound of Dead Men in Sindhi language. As the dust was cleared away, a grand city was discovered, planned and engineered with a sophistication that surpassed the ancient cities of Sumer and Egypt. The seals found in Mohenjo-daro bore the same unreadable script as those from Harappa. Despite being hundreds of miles apart, it was clear that these two cities were remains of a vast and ancient civilization. Today we call it the Indus Valley Civilization. 4,000 years ago, while pyramids rose along the Nile and ziggurats flourished in Mesopotamia, a great urban culture thrived along the Indus. But what became of these people? The decline of the Indus Valley civilization coincides with a major climate shift that caused severe droughts in the region, making agriculture difficult for a society that relied heavily on floods for irrigation. Those same climate shifts caused a change in Central Asia, making the steppes drier and cooler, triggering change of vegetation and causing the Indo-Aryans to continuously migrate southwards over hundreds of years. According to modern science, the Indo-Aryans arrived to India around 1900 BCE, establishing a small country they called Brahmavarta. This creates a problem since traditionally Vedic civilization is thought to be exceedingly old. In fact, Krishna's life is attributed to around 3228 BCE or over 5,000 years ago. The subsequent dawn of Kali Yuga, or the Age of Darkness, suggests that people no longer possess the abilities to transmit Vedic knowledge orally due to the disturbed nature of this age. For this reason, as it is described in Vishnu Purana, Book 3, Chapter 3, Vedavyasa appears to divide Vedic knowledge and write it down for the benefit of all living beings. When it comes to Vedic manuscripts, they are thought to be about 5,000 years old as well. In ancient India, unlike today, scribes did not have an unlimited supply of paper, neither did they have the luxury of the printing press. Instead, they used palm leaves, cut into narrow strips, cured and polished smooth, each leaf pierced and bound together with cord. Sometimes they used birch tree bark, carefully stripped and dried. But in the heat of the Indian summer, followed by monsoon rains, manuscripts rarely survived more than a few centuries unless they were copied again and again. A text lived only so long as someone cared enough to rewrite it. For this reason, sages of ancient India did not rely on writing, instead, passing knowledge down through a powerful oral tradition. In fact, the earliest known inscriptions are edicts of Ashoka found on pillars, boulders, and cave walls throughout the Indian subcontinent, and attributed to Emperor Ashoka of Maurya Empire dating to 250 BCE. Notably, the oldest surviving physical manuscripts yet discovered are Gandharan Buddhist texts, birch bark scrolls that were stored in clay jars, preserving them since the 1st century BCE. Apart from the difficulty preserving written texts, the lack of surviving manuscripts could also demonstrate the reluctancy of the Hindu sages to switch to writing, perhaps deeming it as alien, less reliable, and overall an inferior way of conveying knowledge. However, due to social changes and the influence of Buddhism, writing became common among Hindu scholars by the time of the Gupta Dynasty. Alongside poems and scientific textbooks, the sacred oral tradition was written into the historic record. This is the era that is responsible for the date of Kali Yuga that we use to this day. Surprisingly, it has less to do with spiritual tradition and more with science. The period of the Gupta Dynasty was time of rapid scientific development when knowledge traveled along the same roads as merchants and diplomats. Indian scholars encountered new celestial models brought from the Western Hellenistic kingdoms and used it to systematize and refine earlier indigenous traditions, turning them into formal scientific disciplines. Aryabhata is the first known of the major scholars from the classical age of Indian mathematics and Indian astronomy. He lived somewhere around 476–550 CE. His astronomical treatise, Aryabhata, forged the foundation of modern mathematics. Although many impressive discoveries and ideas are attributed to him, today we are going to talk about one specific quote from Aryabhata. The third chapter of this book is called Kalakriya. In the text 10, we'll find the famous words: "When 3 Yugapadas and 60 times 60 years had elapsed from the beginning of the Yuga, then 23 years of my life had passed." Considering the timing of his life, this statement would yield us a date around 3102 BCE as the beginning of Kali Yuga. The question is, was he the first to calculate this date, or did he describe a date that was already in use before him? We can say with certainty that Aryabhata did not invent the concept of yugas. They appear in the early Vedic texts. For example, Manu Smriti, chapter 1, text 69–86. Another curious source that mentions yugas before Aryabhata is a Buddhist glossary called Dharma Sangraha, verse 88, attributed to Nagarjuna, who lived around 2nd century CE. Interestingly, Aryabhata deviates from the standard model of time. According to Aryabhata chapter 1 verse 3, 72 yugas constitute the period of a Manu, instead of 71 given in Smritis. The other curious deviation is that Aryabhata's calculations imply that he used yugas of equal size, which also contradicts Smritis. This was one of the reasons Aryabhata was fiercely criticized by another great astronomer, Brahmagupta, who lived 1 century later. It's actually quite funny and entertaining to see this sort of scientific rivalry, even if one-sided. Both of them played a significant role in the history of scientific development, and I think that Aryabhata and Brahmagupta complement each other in a weird way.
He's gay, but he has a special connection to classical music. There's many things that are interesting about him.
But I digress. Around the same time, another great scholar named Varahamihira discusses a phenomenal astronomical treatise called Surya Siddhanta in one of his works. What makes Surya Siddhanta so special is that it teaches how to accurately compute planetary positions for any date within wide range of years, hundreds of years. Some of you might think, is it actually that complicated? And the answer is yes, it is very complicated. If planets moved in a perfect circle at a perfectly steady speed, it would be very easy. This is called mean motion. You see, when observing planetary motions from Earth, planets don't move in a simple motion, they appear to move with fluctuating speed. They speed up, slow down, sometimes they even appear to go backwards or stop altogether. Surya Siddhanta solves this problem by introducing corrections and rules to adjust the mean motion of a planet to its true position.
Yeah, Mr. White! Yes, science!
But the core of this method is based on a concept called ahargana, or the epoch. To calculate ahargana, an unknown scholar backtracked a day to when the mean longitude of all planets was perfectly aligned in 0 degrees Aries. This is purely virtual phenomenon, no such conjunction actually took place. However, it becomes easy to find the true positions of the planets after simple mathematical calculations and applied corrections, when using this made-up date as a starting point. The author of Surya Siddhanta suggests that this alignment takes place in the beginning of creation and, by extension, in the beginning of each yuga. This way of dating Kali Yuga was adopted by other astronomers and astrologers and made its way into religious tradition as well, although this idea does not find any support in Smriti. It's important to understand that the history of astronomy starts with ancient Babylonians. Their observations became the foundation of this science. It was later developed by Egyptians. Eventually, ancient Egypt was taken by the Persians, and then by Alexander the Great, who founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BCE. Alexandria, perfectly poised on the shore of the Mediterranean, became the melting pot of knowledge. The introduction of Greek geometry and trigonometry allowed astronomy to upgrade from cataloging stars to estimating the real model of the solar system. Ironically, it is often conquest powered by greed and ambition that forces the globalization and exchange of ideas. Alexander the Great had failed to conquer India. Nevertheless, new routes were established and had a resonating impact on history of the world. During the 2nd century CE, Yavaneshvara translated a book called Yavana Jataka, or Horoscopy of the Greeks. Later on, this book was versified. The 79th chapter of this book contains the early method of calculating planetary positions. It calculates ahargana without Kali Yuga epoch. Conversely, this ahargana is based on so-called small yuga of 165 years. It is clear that Yavana Jataka adopted a model similar to that of Greek Nabonasar epoch, which means that the idea of using Kali Yuga ahargana was developed during Gupta's period, and thus it is not indigenous to Vedic tradition. This doesn't deny the originality of Vedanga Jyotisha and does not diminish the achievements of Indian scholars that ultimately transformed and developed this knowledge, producing many innovations that changed our world. This is the topic for another video, however. Let's see what Smriti has to say about Kali Yuga. Vishnu Purana, Book 4, Chapter 24, Dynasty of the Kings of the Kali Yuga, Text 30 onwards. When the Sun, the Moon, and Jupiter are in one lunar mansion called Tishya, also called Pushya, the Krita age shall return after the age of Kali. This idea is supported by Bhagavata Purana, Book 12, Chapter 2, verse 24, and Vayu Purana, Chapter 99, verse 413. Interestingly, such alignment happens about 3 times every century. Here's just 2 examples. Nevertheless, Puranas do not mention planets aligning in Aries. Puranas describe the observable sky and true motion of the planets, not the mean motion. The next passage says, "From the birth of Parikshit, who was born soon after the battle of Kurukshetra, to the coronation of Nanda, it is to be known that 1015 years have elapsed." This idea is supported by Bhagavata Purana and Matsya Purana, although editions vary on the number of years ranging from 1015 to 1500. The Nanda in question is Mahapadmananda. It is uncertain when Mahapadmananda was coronated. We know that Nanda dynasty had 9 kings and was overthrown by Chandragupta Maurya and his mentor, famous Chanakya Pandit, also known as Kautilya. It is known that Chandragupta was coronated around 322 BCE, soon after the unsuccessful campaign of Alexander the Great into India. This gives us a great anchor date to trace the beginning of Kali Yuga. Both Vishnu and Vayu Purana say that Nanda dynasty lasted for about 100 years, which means that Mahapadmananda was coronated around 422 BCE, although some sources place his coronation at 345 BCE. Adding 1015 to 345 will yield us the approximate birth of Parikshit around 1360. It goes to show that Maharaja Parikshit was born anywhere from 1360 to 1922, which means that Kali Yuga could not start on 3102 BCE. Puranas provide several alternative ways to track how much time passed between the birth of Parikshit and Mahapadmananda. In Bhagavata Purana, Book 12, Chapter 2, Text 28, Shukadeva Goswami says to Maharaja Parikshit, "The 7 sages, the Great Bear, will remain connected with that particular lunar mansion for 100 human years. Currently, during your lifetime, they are situated in the nakshatra called Magha. When the constellation of the 7 sages is passing through the lunar mansion Magha, the age of Kali begins. It comprises 1200 years of the demigods. When the great sages of the Saptarishi constellation pass from Magha to Purvashadha, Kali will have his full strength, beginning from King Nanda and his dynasty. It means that 10 nakshatras have passed, which means 1000 years, not 1500, since Saptarishi spent only 100 years in one lunar mansion. Again, if Nanda was coronated around 345 BCE, it will bring us to 1345 BCE. I have to admit, after some research and experiments, I still cannot understand how this technique is supposed to work. According to my finds, the Great Bear, or Saptarishi, always travels close to Leo, and it doesn't change within the span of 10,000 years. It doesn't necessarily mean that this method is invalid, but I don't possess enough knowledge to be able to use it. Unfortunately, there is not much credible information about it either. This is a good moment to talk about something very important, in particular, the difference between Shruti, that which is heard, and Smriti, that which is remembered. Shruti is considered a divine revelation and includes 4 Vedas. Each Veda has 4 layers: Samhitas, hymns; Brahmanas, performance of rituals; Aranyakas, meaning of rituals; and Upanishads, philosophy. On the other hand, Smriti are composed by sages throughout history and include Itihasa, like Ramayana and Mahabharata, Puranas, etc. Sages who compose these texts are very learned, but they are not omniscient, and they can make mistakes. We also have to remember that since many of these texts are over 1000 of years old, and some of them are of impressive size, mistakes in recitations and copying of the original texts by succeeding generations are almost unavoidable. What's important is that Vedic culture preserves the essence and the spirit of these teachings, and this is exactly my intention. Ultimately, the certain day of the beginning of the Yuga doesn't really change much for us. There is no doubt that we live during the beginning of the Kali Yuga epoch, as this is described in Smritis. The ideas proposed by Sri Yukteswar do not find support in Smritis, nor they are strictly scientific, albeit we can appreciate open-mindedness and exploration of ideas beyond the established dogma. My original concern was to find the date of Krishna's birthday, and it spiraled into research on this topic, as the departure of Krishna is intertwined with the start of Kali Yuga. Let me present the final and ultimate proof from the Puranas that describe the chronology of royal dynasties. During Krishna's lifetime, there was a king of Magadha, modern Bihar, called Jarasandha, Kamsa's father-in-law. Jarasandha belonged to Brihadratha dynasty. His son, Sahadeva, was killed during the Kurukshetra battle. The last member of Brihadratha dynasty, Ripunjaya, was assassinated. The Puranas say that the kings of this dynasty ruled for 1,000 years, but most of them have what appears to be an exaggerated length of reign. After the death of Ripunjaya, Pulaka placed his son Pradyota on the throne and founded the Pradyota dynasty that lasted about 138 years. From the Jain tradition, we know that Pradyota died on the same day as Mahavira, around 527-510 BCE. If we assume that Pradyota ruled for 23 years, we will find that his reign started around 540 BCE. Then, if we add 900 years, assuming that from that moment to the lifetime of King Jarasandha 900 years had passed, we will yield 1440 BCE as an approximate time of life of Jarasandha and Krishna. This aligns with our previous findings, although I am inclined to think that they lived closer to the Bronze Age collapse. I will talk about that in a video where I date Krishna's birthday. In conclusion, I want to say that I am aware that my statement goes against the common belief, and many people will be reluctant to accept my findings, but I showed you the evidence, even though in a very compressed form. It is easy to dismiss this topic, and saints usually do not concern themselves with such secular matters. Nonetheless, it is important to follow the truth and abandon unintended errors. Unfortunately, oftentimes people would accept any source so long as it benefits their cause. One example is Kerala's chronograms. Some of them use Kali Ahargana for dates earlier than that of Aryabhata, which leads some to believe that Kali Ahargana must have been in use in Kerala even before the time of Aryabhata. But it is false, because those inscriptions and manuscripts themselves were created after Aryabhata's lifetime. My name is Ratnarupini Das, and my intention is to establish the truth and present it for the benefit of everyone who accepts the authority of Sruti and Smriti tradition. If you have additional evidence or substantial contradicting evidence, please feel free to share. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, whoever you may be.